Welcome to course overview of the CipherVibe Cybersecurity for Beginners course. Today, we will make the Complete Cybersecurity Learning Roadmap understandable, practical, and connected to the rest of your learning path. Cybersecurity is the practice of managing risk created by computers, software, networks, identities, data, and the people who use them. Beginners do not need to learn every tool. They need durable mental models, safe practice, and evidence that they can explain and improve a system. The purpose of this lesson is not to memorize a collection of terms. It is to build a mental model you can apply when tools, platforms, and threats change. We will define the core ideas, walk through a repeatable defensive workflow, examine mistakes that frequently mislead beginners, design useful safeguards, and finish with a safe portfolio exercise. Throughout the course, remember that security work begins with authorization, scope, and evidence. Use the exercises only on local systems you own or environments you have explicit written permission to assess. Pause when you need to. Write concepts in your own words, record observations, and distinguish what the evidence proves from what you are merely assuming. That habit is more valuable than rushing through another tool demonstration. Start with 4 concepts that provide the vocabulary for the Complete Cybersecurity Learning Roadmap. First, start with assets, threats, vulnerabilities, controls, trust boundaries, and the difference between a weakness and business risk. Second, use confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and accountability to describe what a security failure changes. Third, connect the NIST cybersecurity framework functions: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Fourth, build computing, networking, identity, and data foundations before specializing in offensive or defensive tools. Do not study these as isolated definitions. Ask which asset or business service is involved, where the relevant trust boundary sits, which identity performs the action, and what reliable evidence would show that the control worked. Security reasoning is a chain. Source evidence supports an observation. The observation supports a conclusion. The conclusion informs a proportionate decision. The decision has an owner, an expected result, and a way to verify it. When any link is missing, say so. A professional explanation can include uncertainty without becoming vague. For example, a network record may prove that 2 addresses communicated, but it may not prove which human initiated the action or whether the content was malicious. Use diagrams whenever a relationship is difficult to explain in a sentence. Mark identities, systems, data flows, boundaries, and controls. A simple, accurate diagram is more useful than a crowded picture that implies knowledge you do not have. The course is arranged in a deliberate sequence so that each module answers questions raised by the previous one. Modules 1 through 3 establish the foundation. You will learn security and ethics, understand how operating systems represent users, processes, files, services, and events, then trace how systems communicate through networks and the web. Modules 4 through 8 apply those foundations to the major control surfaces. Identity explains who or what may act. Data security explains what must remain confidential, accurate, and available. Vulnerability management turns weaknesses into prioritized, verified work. Application security examines trust boundaries in software and APIs. Cloud and container security show how those same ideas operate in programmable infrastructure. Modules 9 through 11 form the defensive operating loop. Logging and detection reveal suspicious behavior. Incident response coordinates decisions that limit harm. Resilience and recovery restore trustworthy service when prevention is not enough. Module 12 connects the technical work to governance, career paths, and a final capstone. The sequence moves from understanding normal behavior to protecting systems, detecting change, responding safely, and communicating risk. You can watch individual lessons as references, but beginners will gain more by completing them in order and producing every portfolio artifact. Now turn the mental model into a repeatable workflow. First, learn one concept through a concise explanation and connect it to a realistic business scenario. Second, observe normal behavior in a local system before deciding what suspicious behavior looks like. Third, practice inside an isolated lab that you own or are explicitly authorized to assess. Fourth, produce a diagram, report, rulebook, detection hypothesis, or demonstration that explains the evidence. Fifth, review uncertainty, mistakes, and next steps instead of treating tool output as unquestionable truth. Before acting, define the objective, scope, owner, and success condition. Collect the smallest amount of trustworthy evidence needed to understand the situation. Preserve timestamps and sources so another person can follow your reasoning. Priorities should be explainable. Consider exposure, identity and privilege, sensitive data, business importance, exploit conditions, existing safeguards, reversibility, and confidence. A dramatic label should never replace that analysis. The workflow does not end when a command succeeds, a ticket closes, or a dashboard turns green. Verify the new state with fresh evidence. Check for recurrence and for side effects introduced by the change. Document the result in plain language: what you observed, what you concluded, what you changed, who approved it, what evidence confirms the outcome, and what uncertainty remains. This disciplined loop, observe, interpret, decide, act, verify, and learn, appears in every cybersecurity specialty. Understanding failure modes will protect you from attractive but unreliable shortcuts. First, collecting certifications without building or explaining anything creates shallow knowledge. Second, starting with exploitation before learning systems and networks makes every command feel like magic. Third, trying to master every specialty at once prevents deliberate practice and useful feedback. Fourth, unsafe labs can expose vulnerable machines, credentials, or personal data to the internet. Fifth, measuring progress by hours watched rewards consumption rather than demonstrated capability. These mistakes often share one cause: confusing an available signal with a complete explanation. A tool can report a finding, a successful action, or a score while important scope, context, ownership, and verification remain missing. Avoid absolute claims. Words such as secure, compromised, fixed, and compliant require scope and evidence. Prefer precise statements such as, "This control blocked the tested path under these conditions," or "The available records show this identity used the service, but do not identify the human operator." Also, resist copying commands without understanding their inputs, outputs, permissions, and side effects. Run one controlled change at a time and record what happened. If an exercise does not behave as expected, that is useful evidence. Stop, inspect the environment, revise the hypothesis, and explain the difference. Good security work is not a performance of certainty, it is careful reasoning under imperfect information. Reliable security uses layers because no single control can prevent every failure. First, use the 12-module sequence to build shared foundations before choosing a specialty. Second, keep a lab notebook with objectives, actions, observations, evidence, errors, and lessons. Third, use fake data, snapshots, isolated networks, and written authorization boundaries. Fourth, build one portfolio artifact per module and improve it after review. Fifth, use official references such as NIST, CISA, CAS, OWASP, MITRE ATT and CK, and the NICE framework. For each important risk, ask 5 questions. What makes the event less likely? What evidence would reveal it? Who can contain it? How will trustworthy operation be restored? Who owns the decision and accepts remaining risk? Least privilege applies to people, applications, devices, automation, data stores, and administrators. Access should be scoped, separated, monitored, reviewed, and removed when it is no longer needed. Every important control needs a test strategy. Include representative normal activity, negative cases, misuse, dependency failure, and rollback. A written policy is not evidence that a technical or operational control works. Design for humans. A safeguard that is impossible to use correctly will be bypassed. Provide safe defaults, understandable messages, usable recovery, and clear escalation. Finally, preserve the evidence trail from observation through decision, action, and verification. That history supports investigations, audits, lessons learned, and honest measurement. Finish the lesson by creating a portfolio artifact rather than merely watching another explanation. First, begin with foundations, ethics, operating systems, and networking. Second, add identity, data protection, vulnerabilities, application security, and cloud security. Third, learn logging, detection, incident response, recovery, and governance as one operating loop. Fourth, complete a capstone that connects business risk to controls, telemetry, response, and recovery. Fifth, choose a specialization only after the common foundations make its trade-offs understandable. Keep the work bounded. Use local systems, fake data, and environments you own or are explicitly authorized to assess. Record the objective, environment, actions, observations, screenshots, errors, conclusions, and limitations. Useful measures for this topic include clear explanations, safe completed labs, portfolio artifacts, evidence quality, and ability to connect controls to business risk. A useful measure has a precise definition, a trustworthy source, an owner, a review frequency, and a known limitation. Ask someone unfamiliar with the exercise to review your artifact. Can they understand the system, the evidence, the decision, and the remaining uncertainty without watching you perform the lab? When the answer is yes, you have created more than notes. You have evidence of professional reasoning and communication. Continue with the next module in the Cybersecurity for Beginners playlist and use the complete written curriculum at CipherVibe.com/news. CipherVibe is operated by Cloudsectech LLC. This video is general education, not legal, compliance, financial, or incident response advice. Never access, scan, or test a system without its owner's explicit written authorization.